distinguished participants in your various categories, welcome to this last session of the 12th edition of the National Security Symposium. I would like to thank the RDF, and in particular the Rwanda Defense Force Command and Staff College, who have kept inviting me to this symposium since its very early years, sometimes as a panelist, other times as a moderator, and on occasion as an informal resource person. For me, it is one of the highlights of my intellectual year ever since I left active academia about 10 years ago. Today, I have the privilege of chairing this session, which, like those that took place earlier, brings together distinguished and vastly experienced panelists to tell us about and help us think through the very important issue of security in Africa. Originally, we had been given about 3 hours during which to hold this discussion, but that has been slimmed down a little bit. So we shall have just slightly under 2 hours. The panelists and I did agree on how we are going to conduct this. And one of the things we agreed is that insecurity in Africa is a bit too broad. We are going to try and narrow it and refocus it and make it much more manageable. And so we are going to be looking at challenges to security, or security challenges in Africa. And we plan to look at this at 3 levels. First, violent criminality within countries. And here one could give the example for those, I'm sure many in this room are well-traveled across the continent. There are countries in Africa where you arrive, in the capitals to be precise, and you're told that there are certain no-go areas in the city. They tell you after dark, don't go here, don't go here. It always suggests that the security establishment have ceded space to criminals. We would like to look at this and try to think about how things of this kind happen and how they could be prevented or dealt with. We shall also look at intercommunal violence and the causes and drivers behind it. And then lastly, perhaps more importantly, internal and cross-border insurgencies, of which we have so many in Africa. I'm reminded of a panel yesterday when the former Minister of Agriculture in Rwanda put up a map where she showed so many African countries in conflict. And that, I think, does point to what is happening across our continent. These are issues that need to be understood, but also solutions to which should be found. So the panelists today are going to help us to think through this and see how these things can be dealt with. Now, in terms of procedure, we shall be giving 10 to 15 minutes to each panelist to make their opening statements, and then we shall proceed from there with some interventions from the moderator, and then we shall open the discussion to those in the room. Now, very quickly, I want to move on to inviting the panelists today. And I'm going to start with Dr. Vincent Biruta, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Rwanda. Dr. Biruta is a trained physician. He trained at Université Catholique de Louvain and also at the Université Libre de Bruxelles. Previously, has been Minister for Environment, Minister for Natural Resources, Minister for Education, Minister for Public Works and Transport and Communication, Minister for Health, President of the Senate, and also President of the National Transitional Assembly. Dr. Biruta, you're welcome. Please join me in welcoming him to the podium. Next is His Excellency Abdoulaye Diop, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Mali, who is a career diplomat with a wealth of experience in strategic and political roles at both national and international levels. Previously, Mr. Diop was Ambassador of Mali to the US. He was head of the World Food Programme mission in Ethiopia at the AU and also in Malawi. He was also Secretary General of the African Capacity Building Fund. He was Chief of Staff and Director de Cabinet for the President of the AU Commission, and also an independent member of FIFA's Governance and Control Commission, which also emphasizes his interest in and love for football. Your Excellency Abdoulaye Diop, please welcome to the podium. The fourth panelist is Brigadier General Dr. Methodi Haji Janev, who is an academic and consultant with vast operational and academic experience spanning 25 years. He specializes in international relations, international security, and post-conflict nation building. His current work focuses on governance of security sector reform, cyber security, and cyber policy. He was trained at the US Air Force Command Staff and Command College, the US National Defense University, the Joint and Combined Warfighting School, and has a PhD in international relations and international law from the University of Skopje in Macedonia. Previously, he was Macedonia's defense attaché in the US and also non-resident military advisor to the Macedonian mission at the UN. Last but not least, I will invite Mr. Tamuka Kagoro. Welcome to the podium. Mr. Kagoro is a member of the Pan-African movement, quite well known to, arguably, I think, all of us in this room. He's a lawyer, entrepreneur, social justice activist, and has served in national, regional, and global leadership positions in the private sector, global philanthropy, and the United Nations. He has received many honors, one of which was from the World Economic Forum as a young global leader, from Yale University as World Fellow, and is also a partner in a leading law firm in Zimbabwe. Welcome, Mr. Kagoro. Okay, without further ado, I would like to invite our panelists to make their opening statements. And now I have the pleasure of inviting Dr. Vincent Biruta to give us his opening statement.
Thank you, moderator. Let me start by saying that Africa faces a wide array of security challenges, including terrorism, insurgency, organized crime, cyber threats, intercommunal conflicts, and many others. And each of these present unique threats to stability and development. The root causes of these security challenges are rooted in factors such as poverty, inequalities, weak governance, and historical grievances, which are oftentimes the result of colonial legacy. So addressing these root causes is essential for long-term solutions, because sometimes we would see that we tend to address consequences of a situation while not really dealing with the root causes. And this is the reason why sometimes a conflict would sleep for a few years and resume after some time. This is because sometimes we are just addressing the consequences without taking time to address the root causes. Security challenges also often transcend national borders, requiring regional cooperation and coordination. Regional organizations such as the African Union and sub-regional bodies such as the East African Community can play crucial roles in fostering collaboration among African states. However, a lack of coordination among these organizations could also be a source of further complications. All these situations, these conflict and persistent security challenges hinder socioeconomic development by disrupting infrastructure projects, deterring investment, and displacing communities. This in turn exacerbates poverty and undermines efforts to achieve sustainable development goals, which ultimately will also affect the security situation. Let me recall here that it is the prime responsibility of governments to ensure the safety and security of their citizens. This entails investing in security forces, implementing effective policies, and putting in place laws which assure good governance to address underlying grievances. While government must take the lead in addressing security challenges, international support is also crucial. And these could include capacity building assistance, intelligence sharing, and diplomatic efforts to address cross-border threats. Investing in preventive measures such as education, job creation, and community engagement is also crucial to help addressing the root causes of insecurity and reduce the likelihood of conflict. We need also to be inclusive in the solutions we implement and involve all segments of the society, including women, youth, and marginalized communities, starting from the stage of policy drafting and adopting. Their perspectives and experiences are essential for crafting effective and sustainable security policies. So addressing security challenges in Africa requires a long-term perspective and sustained commitment from governments, international partners, and civil society. The African Union has put in place some structures and policies to address security challenges on the continent, and I would mention only the African Peace and Security Architecture, whose the Peace and Security Council is the main pillar. Achieving complete security cannot be a quick fix, but is rather a complex and ongoing process. Security cannot be achieved only with the right policies and institutions. It requires constant monitoring and adjustment of measures in place. Thank you, moderator. I'll stop here for now.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Biruta. We will move on quickly. I will ask my questions at the end of everyone's opening statements. Now, could we move on to Mr. Abdullahi the Minister of Mali, please.
Thank you, moderator. Good morning to everybody. Let me start by, first of all, expressing the full solidarity of the people and the government of Mali with the people of the government and to the people and the government of Rwanda as you are celebrating the 30th anniversary of the genocide against the Tutsi, which to some extent also explained very well the topic we are trying to address. I want also to thank the Minister of Defense and the RDF College for extending this invitation to us. And of course, I convey to you greetings from Colonel Assimi Goïta, the President of the Transition of Mali. I'm here with Brigadier General Aluboy Jara, who I hope could complement me because I will be speaking maybe at the 30 feet high and maybe with a different perspective. I hope he can take us down to 30 feet so it can provide really concrete reflection. I also want to own all the issues that have been addressed by my brother Vincent Biruta right now. So it's, he talked on some of the issues that I would want to address. So allow me not to come to those one again and to repeat him. I would like to address the topic of the security challenges in Africa by sharing some reflections from our own perspective, specifically the experience, based on the experience of Mali. I want also, at the end, to share some lessons that Mali has learned throughout the crisis we have gone through for the past 10 years and so. In terms of the challenges, I don't want to go into the detail. I think there are many. They vary from one country to another. And some of the challenges to security in Africa are internal. Some are also external. In terms of the internal challenges, we know we have poverty, unemployment, terrorism, violent extremism, inter-community violence, bad governance, and many other issues. In terms of external, we know colonialism and neocolonialism and imperialism are one of the key drivers to instability and insecurity in Africa. The predation of natural resources is also one of the key points. I think in terms of impact and the challenges of security in Africa, Rwanda is a good example because Rwanda, the issues we have gone through, especially the genocide, has not been made in Africa. I think the ideology itself has been imported, developed, and executed using foreign forces and also trying to oppose communities who have been living together for centuries. And also, I think the example of Rwanda is quite exemplary because out of this tragedy, Rwanda has emerged as a source of resilience and trying to build a community and unity among the Rwandese. So one of the key challenges, in my view, to Africa's security today is the presence of the foreign military on our soil, specifically the foreign military interventions in Africa, which have created chaos and disorder in many countries. I see also the instrumentalization of the regional and international organization and also the politicization of the human rights issue as one of the key problems that we have on the continent. I include also the genocide in that. And if you look at this intervention, I will come back to the intervention of Libya in our region, what problems it has created into our region. So I will work on that one in particular. But the regional organization today, Vincent talked to the necessity of collaboration among the organization, but we need also to think about what type of regional organization we need in Africa. How can we ensure that the leadership in our regional organization is assumed by Africans themselves and that we are not subjects or we are not proxies for foreign power to achieve their own goal and opposing countries and African citizens. Another challenge also is the geostrategic interests of certain powers trying to make Africa the private preserve. As we said in France, the chasse gardée. This competition also still remains a problem. France in particular is one of the bad examples that we have, because if you compare today in Africa, the evolution or the political trajectory of Anglophones and Francophone countries, you will see that really Francophone remains still adolescent, because they are hardly able to manage their own business. Another key issue, I think, has been also addressed by the previous panel by Dr. Kaberuka and others, is the double standards. And sometimes I will call it even the hypocrisy of specifically international powers, Western powers in particular. If you look at the way they reacted to the Ukraine war, is not the same that they did to the crisis in the Sahel, but human life has the same value. So why when we were in the G5 Sahel, we spent 10 years looking for 400 million euros, which we didn't get. In Ukraine, I think they spent billions in a week. This is also, even on the human rights issues, we see that really there is a double standards in looking at human rights issues, be it in Africa or elsewhere. You will clearly see what are the difference. But in summary of these causes, I see two main drivers. The first one is the governance, bad governance. I hope Brian and others will come maybe more extensively on that one. And the second one I see is the foreign interference. Based on Mali's experience, we think our major problem has been the NATO intervention in Libya, which in my view has not been well think through, well prepared, even well executed. For me, it's really a big geostrategic mistake, to say the few. Otherwise, I think the entire region has been drawn in the conflict because we want just to get rid of a leader. But it has been a game changer in our region, to say. It does not mean that we didn't have problems in Sahel or in Western Africa, but the major problem has been that when this intervention occurred, it has destabilized totally what we call the Sahel and West Africa for 10 years. And as a consequence, Mali lost about 60% of his territory. We had, I will go forward a bit. We had, as a consequence, the French military intervention in Mali. We have the UN. For French intervention, Barkhane, they spent about 2 million euros per day for over 10 years. UN mission MINUSMA was spending $1.3 billion per year over 10 years. The result is a failure, to be blunt. It was not a success, due in part of the lack of sincerity of the partner, specifically France, who has been playing duplicity toward Malians, and also regarding the UN, it was the inadaptation of the peacekeeping force, which has been deployed to maintain peace in an area where there is no peace to be kept. I'm quoting the UN Secretary General itself, because our major threat is an asymmetric threat, not to mediate between two warring parties. So when President Goïta and the team came into the power, they have decided we need to get out of this paradigm, otherwise we will spend the 100 years in this problem. We have decided to go into paradigm shift, because mostly the security in Mali for the past 20 years or so has been built under the foreign presence, which has been a failure, as I said. We said, okay, let's go to the basic to put the security of the Malians in the hands of the Malian. Malians should be responsible for their security, die for their country, preserve their sovereignty and the unity of the country. We have made significant investment in building the capacity of the army, having a new vision for our army, a new strategy. Today we are spending 1/4 of our budget in the military because we have no choice. As a consequence today, Mali who has lost 60% of the territory down the road. With our own meager resources, we have been able to retake Kigali, which has been not under the control of the government for the past 10 years, and many other areas. Today, Malians have full control of their territory, and this is also a big success where the major foreign armies didn't succeed. This paradigm shift is also based on the reaffirmation of the Malian sovereignty, which we resume into 3 principles. The first one is whatever in our relation with our partners is to respect the sovereignty of Mali, to respect the sovereign choices and the choice of partners of Mali, and to make sure in all decisions the vital interests of the Malian people are looked after and respected. Let me end by sharing with you 10 lessons that we can take from our experience. As I said in the previous panel, no African country should outsource its security to foreign military. That is our responsibility, and no one will help us. No one helped Rwanda during the genocide. You have to deal with it yourself. So it means that Africans, we need to deal with our problem and not to outsource our security to foreign military, which always have its own interests. Second lesson, Africa should develop its own narrative, be it on terrorism. Even on the Sahel, the previous panel was developing the Sahel, but even the conception of the Sahel now is a Western conception. We know the Sahel is 11 countries from Senegal to Somalia. But when they talk about Sahel now, they talk about Mali, Burkina, Niger, and Chad, which is not the case. And second, they see Sahel as a problem. But why these countries are fighting for the Sahel? Because their interests, their geostrategic interests, their resources. Even you are from the military, we know the water will be one of the key resources that we'll be fighting for the upcoming 50 years, more than the oil. But we know the underground water resources in the Sahel are huge, and people are looking for them. Even the conception of the terrorism, I don't have time to develop. Maybe when I receive questions, I will come to that one as well. The third lesson is we need to be mindful of the connection between certain Western powers and terrorist groups. In the Sahel, I think they are very involved in the constitution and the formation of many of the terrorist groups. I would say even some powers have the remote control, because when they decide terrorists will strike in this country, it will come. I think that one is, Mali has even a case before the Security Council against a member of the Security Council for this type of link. Fourth lesson, I think, is to take responsibility of our own failure. Everything is not the responsibility of those powers. Where we have the responsibility, we have to admit we have our own issues. We need to go into it and accept it. The fifth is to provide our own solution. As I said in the previous panel on the economic issues, I think for the security, for the defense of our country, we need to provide our own solution. And also, the sixth lesson is we have to make sure that we are in the position to finance military expenditure based on our own resources, because this is the price of the sovereignty. The seventh lesson is to transform our regional organization and to establish mechanisms whose leadership is truly African and shelter from foreign interference. We have established between Mali, Burkina, and Niger the alliance of the Sahel states. Maybe in the question, if I have time, I can develop this new dynamic to count on ourselves to have an organization which is not funded by others, where the leadership is on our own, and we are also working for the interests of our people. 8, the political and institutional reform are also necessary in rebuilding our states. Following on the previous panel, I think security problems are mainly and foremost economic problems. We need to transform our economies to benefit the majority of our people, the majority being women and our youth. This is a national security issue for us. The last issue is to get Africa voice, Africa weight and to make sure that Africa sits at the table. The previous panel was saying that Africa should be on the table. No, Africa should be at the table, but as my friend Lumumba said, not as a menu, but Africa has to be the cook. It has to be an active cook also to bring the experience of Africa at the table. So I will just stop there. Maybe with the questions, I will be able to develop some of these issues, but we have first and foremost to count on ourselves to tackle the security challenges of Africa.
Okay, thank you very much, Your Excellency. Could we now move on to Dr. Haji Yanev?
Okay, thank you very much. Before I start, I'd like to thank the government of Rwanda and the honorable people of Rwanda that basically provided me with this opportunity to come and see how they have risen from ashes and like Phoenix, they actually grew up their country, and I compliment on that. The second, I'd like to also thank the organizers of the conference. But I also have to express that basically my concern, actually. I thought I'm going to talk about something, then throughout the conference I saw so many distinguished panelists talking about the issues I wanted to touch upon, which was good because I also learned a lot from the very good speakers. So finally, I thought I narrowed down my speech on 2 issues I wanted to address, and then the Honorable Ambassador also touched upon the good governance, which I believe is very important when you talk about security, which left me with one option that I believe it was scratched but not really addressed, and that's how digitalization basically affects the future of security in Africa. The reason I wanted to talk about this is that this process, I know and I understand, may be far away for now, or you don't see it on the horizon that much, but let me tell you, the problem with digitalizations may be multifold, and I'll just emphasize on 2 of them. It will come fast until you blink, and then it will also come multi-directional, which means that if you're not prepared, then it will basically enter all of the sectors, and it can cause, yes, many benefits for innovation, for, let's say, commodity, for well-being. However, when you put some of the challenges into a security context, then basically that is a serious concern. And here is why. One of the reasons is that basically the digitalization itself has a slightly different concept of the way that statehood is designed. We know all that the social contract theory is pretty much top-down. It's a vertical, right? So, but the problem with digitalization is more or less it's okay with some acceptances. It's horizontal. So the governments in digital world are only one player. They are not the only or the top player. They don't have the monopoly of power. They don't pull all the strings. And pretty much the problem is that they don't have concepts ready that basically could be applicable for this. Why it is a problematic? Because it can exploit, if not addressed well, it can exploit all the aspects that may be seen as a threat vectors. And I'll give you an examples from strategic level and going down to tactical level to just show you how asymmetric it could be. The problem with this, for example, could be that, let's say, we talk about the violent radicalization of the youth, right? But guess what? Who is digital now? No, it's not the old generation, but the youngsters. They're hungry for the digital world, and they live digital. They are the one who picked it up very fast, no matter how developed you are or you aren't. So if there is no proper media and information literacy programs that will basically be aligned to the government strategic objectives, that could be a huge problem in radicalization. This doesn't have to be, violent radicalization doesn't have to be always a terrorist. It could also be a huge problem and a challenge that could come actually from the social disparities that digitalization can create. Why? because again, if it's not addressed well, it can deepen existing disparities in the social context. So it could also create a frustration on a long run. Later, it could also bring other aspects, like putting most of the African countries into what now is, let's say, called a heated geopolitical context. And this context, of course, is played by the big players, and all, as you rightfully underlined throughout the whole forum here, have their own interest. So with that being said, digitalization could be a good platform for manipulation, for changing the content and owning the content. And you can't actually be more experienced than Rwandan people to understand how small radio station could basically drive or be a driver and a threat vector that can instigate violence and it can instigate something which is horrible. Finally, I would say that, let's say, although we may put our defenses, we may build our, invest in our heavy equipment, tanks, etc., but the threat could be that asymmetric because it largely reflects the new era or the new changing world that we are facing. In the past, let's say centuries ago, the one who owned the tools was the most powerful. And sadly and unfortunately, we talked about slavery. Then someone clever says, okay, I'll give you the tools, but I will own the land. We entered the feudalism, right? Then someone clever came and says, okay, I'll give you the land, I'll give you the tools, but I'll keep the capital. Today, my friend, we have people that say, okay, I'll give you the land, I'll give you the capital, I'll give you even the tools, and these are the tools, I'll give you the tools, I'll hold the information. So now we are at the stage where digitalization empowered individuals to become sovereign and to accumulate power that only in the past was reserved to, let's say, states. The problem with this is that the concepts, security concepts that are designed out there and we tend to implement are designed for the nation states and international organizations that they have formed as a subject of these rules, regulations, etc. Not for the objects, because you can't hold objects accountable under these regulations. And the asymmetry now is very dangerous because accumulating this power, they are able now to dictate their own policies in their own interest. Put into the, let's say, foreign investments context, put into the critical infrastructure protection context. I understand the logic of, outsourcing this because of efficiency, because effectiveness, etc., but the problem here is that most of these individuals or organizations, corporates, are not bound by citizenship or statehood. They are bound by profit. They are bound by their own interests. And this creates infringements in creating policies. So this new world actually allowed them unprecedented ability or trajectory to advance in their strategic ends with, let's say, a very, very short period of time, and they could be able to move things in a very fast pace and in a great volume. That means they can mobilize youth, they can instigate, let's say, through disinformation, they can instigate asymmetric threats that you will never dream of. Think of, let's say, we talked about with one of my Bulgarian friends here, how influencers can be impactful to youth and how they can, using digital world, using social media platforms, if there is no right policy in place, how they can affect your security, how they can affect radicalization, how they can affect extremism, how they can affect billions of dollars and euros you have put into, attract investments, etc., unless there are right policy in place. And last but not least, let me ask you, and please share with me, I just want to test something. How many of you in the audience there, even wearing a uniform, have the social media, let's say, platforms such as WhatsApp for communication? How many of you? Is there anyone that doesn't have WhatsApp on your phone? Okay. How many of you now, think of this, have set up your app not to download directly the picture? If I send the picture to you, most of the apps are basically designed when you download them that they put this on your hard disk or directly on your phone. Well, guess what? If you're not set up this or not preventing this, you are in a very dangerous, my friends. Why? Because you can be hacked. And this could be a minister, this could be a general, this could be a future minister. If I hacked you and if I collect all the data I want, then that's a power. Unfortunately, the only country in the world now, for now, that has a strategy for data is China. And they are doing it correctly. And I think when addressing, I think it was a few years ago, when Putin was addressing youth in Russia, he rightfully said the one who wins the artificial intelligence competition will rule the world. And I'll stop here.
Thank you very much for that very sobering opening statement. Mr. Kagoro, you're next.
I think ideally I should say amen, and we end the prayer and we go home. In the last 2 days, everything that needed to be said has been said, and I think the two ministers and my brother here have said everything that needs to be said. But as often happens, they say that African preachers are the only people who don't know when to stop when they're finished. So let me, anyway, make some remarks. The greatest challenge to Africa's security remains the dissonance or disconnect between society, which is the generality of the people, the population, wananchi, abaturage, and those people's basic needs, especially their desire for predictable futures, on the one hand, and the actions and inactions of those with the ability, the legitimacy, and the authority to meet the needs of society. Let me repeat. The greatest challenge to African security remains that fundamental disconnect or dissonance between what the people desire and want and aspire for, which is predictable and secure futures, and the actions or inactions of policymakers, of politicians, and others who have the ability, the legitimacy, and the authority to meet or facilitate those needs of society. As a result of the fact that the state, the bureaucracy, and sometimes, yes, the military or securocracy is unable to play this fundamental function of facilitating and guaranteeing security that enables individuals, communities, and citizens to author their own predictable futures. The people whose needs remain unmet are more and more resorting to self-help in order to meet their needs. The gap created by leadership, the gap created by institutions, the gap created by governance is leading people to resort to self-help in order to meet their needs, to secure their futures and the futures of their children. And the state, the African state, that entity with the monopoly over the means of and distribution of violence has failed to protect, to secure, except sometimes the state is very efficient in repressing expressions of poverty or very efficient in protecting a few elites, especially foreign elites. The state never fails to protect multinational companies each time any of their properties or interests are at stake. But the state sometimes grows amnesia when there is a threat to poor people or the poorest of the people. Which means, colleagues, if we're thinking about insecurity, ultimately, there is now a marketplace for and of the means of violence. And the merchants in that marketplace are drawn from various levels of society, including the global. For example, in some of the countries that are listening to me now, there are now local militias or defense units. Sometimes we call them some other names. We have gangs that control the extraction of gold, gangs that control the extraction of minerals, gangs that control narcotics, gangs included in the trade and trafficking of women and girls. Whether it's Zamazama in South Africa or Makorokoza in Zimbabwe or what we are seeing in other parts of the continent. Of course, we have national armies and police and intelligence. It's not always clear who or what they are protecting. This is why this debate happening in the context and presence of security officers is clear. And then I think my brother, Minister Diop, has referred you to the context of Mali, of the Sahel, and it is the context we're seeing in other parts of the continent, including parts of the Great Lakes and parts of the Horn, where private military companies from America, from France, from wherever, and external special forces are present, constantly assuring us that we are insecure and that they have brought security, but constantly unable to deal with the so-called minor problem of our insecurity. So whole governments and foreign money sometimes is pouring into parts of this continent, whether it's in the Sudan or elsewhere. Money is pouring from foreign governments. That money is not solving the extent of violence, it's not solving the insecurity, the forced displacement, but it's pouring. And some of it is being accrued as a debt by the people who are subject of the insecurity. The one thing, though, that as my brother Minister Diop will tell you, even in this period of uncertainty on whether a foreign army is present and special forces and private military companies was assuring any form of security, the one thing that remained secure was the gold moving out of our countries unprocessed, was the ore, the critical minerals, were things that were being taken. So I constantly really just come to remind, since these are generals, one has to be a respectful civilian and simply say, esteemed members of the security forces and diplomats, stop sleepwalking. Africa's insecurity or is security challenges in Africa, often we are then brought into, I call it a Premier League of pettiness, Minister. You know, they tell you the reason why these people are fighting is because of tribalism, Islam, Christianity, pastoralism, and etc. I say, And they just started fighting some more the minute you discovered gold, the minute you discovered chrome, the minute you discovered cobalt. Somehow, tribalism amongst illiterate and semi-literate people in my country has ratcheted up. Hey, my people, book illiterate, chrome literate. This coincidence does not work well. It's important for us to remember that tech and social media is fueling this marketplace of violence, the marketplace of discontent, through misinformation and disinformation, as you have said, but also through production of content. So in essence, insecurity is highly diffused, whether you're talking at a country level or at a sub-regional or regional level, but also highly interconnected, right? So these violent criminals, whether it's intercommunal violence or internal and cross-border, it's very much interconnected. Which means, and talking to a few generals over tea breaks, everybody appreciates this. Military solutions, guns, bombs, grenades, will not solve as an insecurity problem constructed around complex geopolitical, geoeconomic, and also extractivist interests. It essentially means part of what we have seen African militaries do when they were liberation armies, when they became armies, which is the whole of society approach to security, remains the answer. And I liked what you said, Minister Diop. We cannot subcontract or sublet our security to someone else, especially someone else who has an interest in ensuring they are able to get our minerals and our underground water at a price that's affordable or at no price or in exchange for guns and offering security. So we need to understand the society needs better and how society express their needs. I'm always mindful, sir, that when my parents were fighting for the liberation of my country, they were called terrorists. And I'm always mindful when it comes to this naming and labeling, that we don't end up in an overly simplistic concept of everything being terrorism. The greatest terror caused in our country is often by elites in the bureaucracy, in government, and I dare say it, in security, who get into cahoots with foreign interests and are willing to sell their children, great-grandchildren, and grandmothers in exchange for expensive cars, for investments overseas, for little shiny trinket, never factories that produce, never productive economy sectors, but trinkets that distinguish them as natives who did not transcend into understanding economy. I wish to call this what it is. It's not just greed. It's a splendid display of foolishness. Because it seems to me we're exploited on the basis, first, of ignorance. And Minister, you know, very few African countries have satellites. And even when we collectively, and my elder brother, Dr. Kaberuka will tell you this, when there was a desire to actually ensure that you have your own satellites to help you with all sorts of data of intelligence and also gathering, it was torpedoed by some of our own people who said it's too expensive. And yet for us to understand what's happening in our geospatial space, even underground, to know how many or how much minerals we have, we now have to go to those that have the technology. So clearly, how do you do liberation when you depend on funding to do it, you depend on external data to do it, you depend on external expertise to do it, you depend on external technology to do it. I am not saying you should never use external resources and technology. I'm simply saying, if over the next 100 years, there is a desire for a liberated Africa that is truly sovereign, the one terrain of contestation remains: the capacity to produce content and strategic data and have repositories where you can store it. I think it was Dr. Keberuka in the earlier session who talked about the contest over production of genome data. It has now been discovered that the African gene, or the black gene, possesses a lot of solutions to both current and future global health challenges. So there is a contest over our genes. And we are sitting here, when we ask us where do we invest, we want to build a new parliament building with more seats. We want, come on, people. We can blame colonialism for many things, but I think we need to inspect our own heads. We have high unemployment rates, low productivity rates, we export unbeneficiated goods, we now have accentuated challenges related to poverty and inequality that are dramatized by others who want to exploit us some more. And we, faced with this moment, critical moment of leadership, are asked to decide what is important, and what is important is better cars, better buildings. Our priorities insist, sir, that the challenges of insecurity are leadership related. So let me end by looking at two things, because it's important, three things, right? Colonialism left us with weak institutions, with poor infrastructure, fragmented and divided society, and ideologies of divisionism. Colonialism called it divide and conquer. But in the immediate post-independence, it's divide, loot, divide, decimate, divide, extract, divide, and aid. You create a cyclical dependency, intellectual dependency, economic dependency, political dependency, security dependency. So that when you want to do your own security, you have to go external. When you want to do your own economy, you have to go external. When you want to do your own science, you have to go external. When you want to produce data, you have to go external. Now, tell me something. I am a very proud African, as you know. I have spent the last 30 years preaching Pan-Africanism. Dr. Kaberuka, what is Pan-Africanism without capacity to produce own liberation? What is Pan-Africanism without the capacity to think for yourself, to project the future through science, and etc.? So the arbitrary borders are only a problem, and globalization is only a problem because of the challenge. I want to end by saying, when you talked about cybersecurity, poverty, inequality produces hostility, sometimes hostility even to things that are necessary for one's protection. Let me repeat that. Poverty, inequality, and a sense of exclusion makes people hostile or bandits against their own states, bandits against their own institutions. The outrage that is produced in people who feel excluded. It was the minister yesterday of security said, are we afraid of the youth? Actually, more fundamentally, do we love ourselves and our countries, our young people, and our futures enough for us to say, cyber attacks that we're seeing against government institutions, hackers who are hacking into government critical institutions, and this fact that we remain in, according to the African Union, only 5% of African countries have national cybersecurity strategies that are implemented and funded. Now, the proliferation of cybercrime, Kenya next door, which is one of the most developed in terms of cyber, had a couple of people sit in a room somewhere who had come in, I don't know whether it's tourists or investors, who were busy creaming off 5% from people's accounts. So this identity theft, online fraud, attacking business, and threatening government stability. But ultimately, these problems are not unique to us. How do we leverage artificial intelligence? My last point, and I know the chair wants me now to shut up. Insecurity in Africa is a gendered issue. Let me repeat. Insecurity has very fundamental gender dimension. Women hear me talk about, oh, insecurity because of colonialism, because of foreign powers, insecurity because of governance. But many women in Africa face infanticide and sexual and gender-based violence in homes. They face that violence, my brothers, from ourselves. So the insecurity for African women is a multi-layered component. Insecure because they are poor, insecure because of limited levels of education, insecure because some negative cultural practices reinforce it, but insecure because patriarchy, the assumed supremacy that we as males exercise, has essentially meant that even some police officers are guilty of beating up on their women. So I wanted to remind us, gender inequality must be part of the discussion of insecurity so that we are holistic in what we describe.
Thank you, Brian. I'm going to start my brief intervention with you so that we go logically towards the other side. Now, you raised the important issue of the disconnect between the desires and aspirations of ordinary Africans and the behavior of the people that lead them. Now, as a young student, I was a graduate student during that time when certain forms of governance were being sold to Africa, one of which is competitive multipartyism. Now, if we agree that since democracy came back to Africa in the late 1980s, early 90s, that we still have governments where this disconnect between the behavior of people in power and the aspirations of their citizens continue, I think that we have a conundrum that we need to resolve. What kind of governance, what kind of governments do we need to correct this? Now, before you answer this, I was recently in a country led by a monarch, an unelected monarch. And my observations there suggested to me that this is a person who seems to be, or this is a person who leads a government that seems to have its sense of responsibility really well thought out. They seem to do the right thing for their citizens, but they're not elected. Now, in Africa, we have elections, regular elections, but still the governments we elect do not respond to the aspirations of their citizens. What's the answer to this? And I agree with you that this is a cause of insecurity, especially the internal insecurity I mentioned in the form of violent criminality.
You may know, my brother, that I have a particularly strong position that says, let's not conflate electoralism with democracy. Let's not conflate Western liberal democracy with democracy. The apartheid state in South Africa held free, fair, and regular elections where black people were not really included. This is how black people were included. They were asked amongst themselves in a black voters' roll to hold their own elections. So technically speaking, if you just are ticking boxes of liberal democracy, apartheid, that evil system, racist system, was a democratic system. In Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, where I belong or I was born, the Rhodesian government had an A voters roll, B voters roll, multi-parties. White parties contested for power. The tyranny of this lies in this. You will have people go to the extreme and say democracy doesn't work. No, they are talking about a particular type of democracy. Our people have proverbs. Let me give you one in Shona.
Brian, I'm going to have to cut you short.
Okay, you want to say that?
I'm driving towards thinking about how you address this situation.
Yeah, I hear you, but first, the premise you had used is wrong. So that's why I wanted to debunk it, that if the premise you are using is that we have one system which has performed or not, I'm saying that premise is wrong, historically. For me, there is a simple issue. Governance has to be inclusive, it has to be participatory. People have to have a voice. But let me say the Shona proverb that you didn't want to hear. It says, "Mwana singacheme anofira mbereko." The baby that does not cry dies in the mother's, the crib we used to carry babies on the back. The idea in our society was always you must create the safety valves to hear what Abaturaje, to hear what Wananchi, to hear what Abantu want to say. A governance system that creates accountability and responsibility for those that hold public office with consequences. So it's not enough to elect people, they fool around for 5 years, they steal, there are no consequences in the system. So the unique and fundamental sense of agency that needs to be brought to African governance is that responsibility and accountability are necessary concomitants of power. Otherwise, we can hold power in perpetuity, do not deliver anything for the citizens, are not accountable for how we use public resources, and are not responsible for the consequences of our dalliance with all sorts of external actors.
Okay,
so that's a simple answer.
All right, thank you, Brian. This is not just a challenge for Brian. When we open up this discussion, I think that this is an issue we as Africans need to think about. How do we create accountable governments that do not preside over situations where violent criminality becomes the response? What Brian said, when people are deprived, they create forms of self-help. How do we address this? Now, to Dr. Haji Genève, this whole issue of digitalization or artificial intelligence. Now, increasingly, as other panelists said, human rights as an issue has become politicized and instrumentalized. Now, if we agree that, say, for instance, social media pose a threat to stability sometimes, we have had instances where governments shut down the internet. Say, when, for instance, we are having election campaigns. And that has usually been portrayed as a violation of human rights. We have had where people record videos and post them on YouTube with messages that are potentially inciting of violence. And again, when these people are arrested, prosecuted, locked up, governments are condemned for violating human rights. How does one deal with situations like these to prevent potential threats to stability?
Well, that's a very good question. This is why I think it was important to address digitalization because of issues like you explained and what the generous panelists also discussed. What I think is important, and that goes against the governance, good governance, which basically needs to nurture a good leadership. And when I run a good governance in a social security reform, I try to use a comparison and I try to simplify things because sometimes I work with the people that needs simple answers. And I use this example. Take Lord of the Rings. It's a nice book, right? It's about the ring. Consider the ring as the power of governance, right? Everybody around Frodo, who is the promised guy that will basically not be diluted by the evil power of power, is good. So we have a lot of good people, right? But all of the sudden we all bear our weaknesses because we have all our prejudice. So the investment is in the future. And if you don't develop, and if you don't start building proper, let's say, policies that will invest in the future leaders, and we to protect them with good governance, focusing on transparency, accountability, effectiveness, and efficiency, we are not going to succeed. Why I say we? Because when I hear you, I hear most of I come from Southeastern Europe, totally the same issues. Problems with identity, problems with outsourcing our policy, problem with outsourcing what I call engineering democracy. When you manipulate, when you engineer democracy, when you say, yes, it's democratic. Problems with double standards. When you say, okay, we'll care about, let's say, human rights up until, let's say, it comes to the certain interest where we will put now the emphasis on security. We'll trade, in Europe now they call it stabilitocracy. They come up with the word stabilitocracy, which refers to the terms we trade human rights for stability, and we betrayed human rights for stability. In digital world, this is even more dangerous, as I explained, because this could be easily manipulated. You mentioned artificial intelligence. It's not just artificial intelligence. Take a deep fake videos. This is very also dangerous. Recently, a few months ago, a company was twisted and accounted in that company, wired legally over $20 million to a conference of what she believed is a real-life conference, except that all in the conference, except her, were artificial intelligence, emulating or creating the CEO. So she believed, she recorded this, she believed that she is in a conference with legitimate CEOs, and she pressed the button and wired the money. So imagine now, turn this into a policy and turn this into a youth, turn this into a, let's say, segregated youth that they see as inequality just because someone, because of the status, because of the belonging, of the social belonging, can have more access to this, and they don't. So I believe that this is the future, and it belongs it basically starts with us and ends with us. But the future is in our children, in our youth, if we don't develop policies that will balance this advancement, okay, and security, and protect human rights. I think we will end up in a very dark world, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much. Now, I would like to turn to Your Excellency Job. Now, usually in Africa, when we think of issues of insurgency and our, until now, preferred solution of inviting outsiders to come and respond to insurgencies, I think that we don't pay enough attention to questions of why is that necessary. If you look at a country like Mali, so if you look at Mozambique, if you look at the Central African Republic, what happens within their own militaries to make it essential for outsiders to come and intervene in a country that has a military? Now, if you want to tell us a little bit about what was happening inside the Malian army to make it necessary for outsiders to come and provide a non-solution, and therefore to lead again to the reawakening of Mali's political elite and saying, look, we now want to take charge of our own security. But what was happening before?
Thank you. I think I don't want to go maybe in defining what is insurgency, because some of these problems are man-made. Most of them are created just to create tension in our country. But what was happened before within the Malian army, so we had to recourse to the foreign powers. You know, for many years, over almost 30 years, when we had democracy in Mali, we thought, as Dr. Fukuyama said, that it was the end of the history. And we decided then to emasculate the army almost. That we don't need an army, you just need to build school, to build road, to improve the welfare of the citizen, and then, you know, democracy and peace will come by itself. So nothing has been done, and to really capacitate our army. As we said in our country, if you kill your dog because it's bad, the other people's dog will come to bite you. So for me, it's very important that our leaders, we understand that for every country, as I said, you cannot subcontract your security to others. You need to have your own capacity in place, even though we have to be conscious that security problems will not be only resolved by the army. But if you don't have an army, you will not even be in the conversation. So you need to have your army, you have to build your own army. And I'm not saying that all countries will need to have their own system in place, that they don't need anybody. As they said in the previous panel for the economy, you need to have your own army, and you have to have your own capacity, your own strategy, and you will know who I need for what. If I need the Chinese, I need the Russian, for what? So in my view, you need to have, because there was a plan to really destroy our army. We need to come back now to understand that we need to have our own capacity. Not only at the national level also, we have to be mindful. Even if every country has a perfect army, in Africa today, we don't have any regional military capacity. I know countries, outside countries like the size of South Africa, are coming to help the entire continent on the military issues. We have a problem. When we had issues in the Sahel, when we belong to the G5 Sahel, as I said previously, Rwanda has been the only country to give us $1 million. But Rwanda is not the wealthiest country in Africa. It means that we lack confidence. We lack solidarity. As we are going through these challenges in the Sahel for 10 years, Africa has done a little to help us. So we need to understand, with solidarity, we can, I think, mutualize our effort. So we need to have confidence in ourselves, in our capacity to design policy, to protect ourselves, to protect our continent. In my view, it starts even at the individual level. Do you think we have the capacity to protect our people? That's my question.
Thank you very much. Now, lastly, but not least, Dr. Ruta, you raised the important issue of the necessity to get to the bottom or root causes of conflict, if we may reduce this to insurgencies. Within our own region here, we have multiple insurgencies that take place in one country after the other. It seems to me as if our international friends are usually too impatient to want to get to the bottom of the issue. They provide what strike me as artificial solutions, or artificial non-solutions. But the question that always strikes me is this. If we realize that we need to get to the bottom of these, the root causes of these conflicts, why has it become so difficult for us to do that? Because we have insurgencies that have lasted 2 decades, even more. Within us as Africans, and if one may use this slogan that we love to use, African solutions to Africa's problems, we have set up standby brigades, we have set up the Africa Peace and Security Architecture and all these things. They don't seem to work. As somebody who sits in those meetings where these things get discussed, why do we Africans usually seem to be paralyzed when it comes to solving our own security issues?
Thank you. For us to address the root causes of all these conflicts, we would not even need armies or foreign intervention, because some of these issues are related to the leadership, to governance issues, and if we need to address them, we just need to, first of all, to acknowledge them, to agree that those are the root causes, to agree, we define them, and then we sit and we address them by just having a dialogue. And if we ourselves, I mean the concerned countries or concerned government, don't have the leadership which is able to agree on the root causes of a certain situation, then it will become very difficult for us to address them. So we could not blame external actors who are trying to give us solutions, but sometimes are just dealing with the consequences of the situation when we know very well the root causes. So it comes back to the leadership, it comes back to the governance, it comes back to the responsibilities of our governments to be really in charge of the security of our people and our countries. So once again, we need responsible governments, we need responsible leaders who are able to look at those root causes, because they are known. If we, for example, if we look at our own region, the situation in Eastern DRC, the root causes are known, and we don't even disagree on that issue. But the political will to address those root causes is the problem. And it is where issues of leadership come in. It is where governance issues come in, because sometimes there are invested interests for some of the very people who are responsible to address those issues. We talked about mining, about access to resources, and so on and so forth. If those leaders who should address those root causes are involved in illegal mining or are the ones who are running these various armed groups, how do you expect them to just to invest efforts in ending that very situation which is benefiting them? So it is all this. I think we need to own our own problems and to just take the leadership in addressing them. Otherwise, if we understand them, but you don't have the courage, the political will to deal with them, and we outsource the solutions to others, those others will probably bring wrong solutions to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I open up the discussion, I have a special request from the Chief of Staff of the Malian Air Force to make a brief intervention, particularly, but not specifically restricted to what the minister seemed to refer to him. And perhaps you may also want to address the issue he raised, what was happening in the Malian army. For Mali to need external intervention to try and defeat what was essentially an internal security problem. Please, a microphone, the officers here.
Thank you, moderator. Good morning, everybody. I'm General Aluboy Jara, Chief of Staff of the Malian Air Force, and I would like first to express my gratitude for the opportunity to be here and exchange with such a highly distinguished group of professionals. I would also like to thank the moderator for the question you asked Minister Diop and giving me the lead for me to expand a bit on what he said. After the high level of the remarks that we just heard from the panel, for me to make any significant or important contribution, I thought that I should take it down to a lower level and specifically address the officers of this distinguished Command and Staff College of the Rwanda Defense Force. So I'll try to share my observations and my experience from my time as the Chief of Staff of the Malian Air Force during what is probably one of the most crucial periods in the history of my country. You know, when I was myself a student at the Senior Command and Staff College in Nigeria a while back, we had similar events where we were made to think about those issues in Africa, especially security issues, and try to think about solutions. And at that time, I was far from imagining that I would find myself so soon in the middle of those kind of strategic decisions and participate in what will determine the future of 22 million people. So I'll urge the officers here to value the knowledge, the ideas, and the critical thinking skills that they are getting out of this school. My recent experience confirmed to me that war and national security issues in general is first and foremost an intellectual struggle. I can't speak here at the Command and Staff College without bringing my quotes of famous strategic thinkers. It's a tradition in our military schools. So I would say, first, know yourself and know your enemy. And in 1,000 battles, you will not know defeat. Sun Tzu said that. Also, we know that the most important duty of a leader when going to war is to first decide the nature of the war he's embarking on. What does that mean? War is, above all, a confrontation of wills, of ideas, of minds, of intellect. And sadly, in Mali and most African countries, many African countries, I should say, we have long let others decide which issues we should tackle and how we should do it. By doing so, we were condemning ourselves to fight someone else's enemy. And unfortunately, most often, this enemy was ourselves. So we found ourselves fighting ourselves on behalf of somebody else because they gave us the ideas. They thought for us. This country, Rwanda, is the perfect example of that, and Minister Diop, in his opening remarks, referred to it. So I think this problem, so for 10 years, my country was under occupation. On one side, it was occupied by a coalition of terrorist groups, and on the other side, it was occupied by a coalition of international forces who came in to help. And as we heard, outsourcing your national security issues is not the solution. In fact, it is the most painful path toward defeat. And this is what happened to us. And once you understand that, you know the power of narratives. We were made, as the minister just said, we were made to believe that we were too poor to sustain an army. And in the early 1990s, as you referred to the early democratic experience that our countries were embarked on, our political leaders were convinced that their enemy is, in fact, the military institution of their own country. So that's how, to answer your question, they quickly and methodically dismantled the military. We demilitarized the country. We were confident that some external powers would, out of generosity and love for us, come and protect us when we were going to have problems. It didn't turn out that way. And at the same time, of course, some other groups were being trained and prepared to come and take over the country, and of course, hand it over to their sponsors. So, but would you believe that for a long time, the uniform we wore were outsourced from France, from French companies? The food we give our military, the MREs, the combat rations, were outsourced. Someone said that an army marches on its belly, actually, or on its stomach, he said, he corrected. We were marching on someone else's food. How can you have a strong, effective military in that situation? So the first and foremost and most important decision that was made after the change of leadership in our country was to identify who's the real enemy of Mali. And we understood that it was not the poor farmer or the poor herder who was given arms and asked to leave his cattle behind and go die for a few dollars to feed his family. This guy is our brother. He is not our enemy. And he's fighting us because he was also made to believe that his enemy is the Malian state. So know your enemy, think for yourself, take charge of your own destiny. Changing the paradigm that the minister referred to in our country was not easy. It came with sanctions, with threats, with indirect use of force, actually, against us, against the military, against the population. So, deprived of external financial assistance, we had to rely on our own internal resources, which are very limited, but we knew that we didn't have any other solution. So we reinforced our defense institution. We acquired sophisticated equipment from some countries have been cited here, from Russia, from China, from Turkey. And by the way, I should say that those famous Bayraktar drones have made miracles for us. And they're not coming from the US or from France. And they were not given to us. We bought them with our resources. So the 25% of the budget that goes to the military is lost for investments in education, in agriculture, in the energy sector. Currently, Mali is facing a huge energy crisis. So that money that goes in the military today is lost for all those other sectors, but it's a necessity. It's a fundamental prerequisite for us to be able to rebuild again those vital sectors. So in taking back control of our country, we did not use the colonial practices that are being taught, I'm sure, at this prestigious college, those expeditionary counterinsurgency techniques that we all learn at military schools. We drew from our own military history. We drew from the history of the Malian empires, how our ancestors built and run and sustained very effective administrations, huge empires that spanned the whole West Africa and the Sahel. And they did so for centuries before the colonial penetration. We did so by leveraging our own cultural heritage, our customary and religious reconciliation mechanisms. We're trying to harness all of that and bring back our Malian and African authenticity in order to solve our own problems. We tried to use the legacy of the first ever human rights charter that was given to the world. That was the Kuruka-Fuga Charter in the year 1235. That's way before the Universal Declaration that people are using now against us and try to teach us what a human being is. So I'll end up with an advice that comes from one source of hope and optimism that I had while trying to defend my country during this particular period. And I'll ask the officers here to network among themselves. You know, military diplomacy during the political escalation that we recently had with ECOWAS, with all the tensions that were building up and the threats of war against Mali, against Burkina Faso, against Niger. We are preparing ourselves to fight the war if ordered to, but also we were engaging with our counterparts in all those countries. I was talking to most of the Air Force chiefs in all the ECOWAS countries, and we shared ideas, and we discussed, and we knew that we had to give our most honest professional advice to our political leaders and let them know what are the challenges, what are the potential impacts of all the decisions that were being made, but we remained sure that if ordered, we would do it. So, competition.
Okay, General, I'm going to have to stop you.
So I'm sorry. Yeah. So that's the end of what I'm saying, actually. So that's the advice. Please don't hesitate to share among yourselves, to network with your brothers who are here. They are very bright, and you are going to solve together some of the most wicked problems in Africa in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very insightful intervention. It's now time to open up the discussion to participants on the floor. We have just under half an hour. We will not afford to have too many questions, but could I kindly request those who ask questions be brief. Don't make speeches, don't make long statements. Kindly ask a brief question or make a brief intervention. So who wants to go? The gentleman over there.
Thank you. Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Simon Locke from Rwanda Defense Force. I am a student from Rwanda Defense Force Command and Staff College. My question is about the industrial revolutions. The fourth one that is happening, driven by artificial intelligence, is proving to be a pivotal for the development of different countries. What could Africa do not to remain behind like in the last 3 industrial revolutions? Thank you.
Thank you. Over there.
Thank you. Just about at the time that this symposium was about to start, we saw on CNN, Amanpour, the prosecutor from the International Criminal Court, ICC, revealing that the ICC had been created for Africans. So one of the threats that Africans are dealing with also, or hanging on their heads, is this international justice and the way policing is being done on Africans. So, combined with that, what is happening, the whole crisis that is happening in Europe has, of course, an impact on Africa, and of course on crises which are going on at the moment, at this time, like in our region. And we have powers fighting for resources there, and it impacts us. So just if anyone can comment on this one, because everything is combined. Some people that we thought had values apparently had other plans. Thank you.
Okay, over here. Here at the front.
I'm Major General Jerome Ngendahimana, a retired general from RDF. Honorable Abdoulaye Diop talked about African solidarity in addressing security challenges on our continent. My concern is about immigration to Europe, especially of our African youth, and the deaths that result mainly in the Mediterranean Sea. My question is addressed to both our honorable ministers. Is there any concerted mechanism response to this issue at AU level? Thank you.
Thank you. Could we just have one other question for this round? In front here.
Thank you. I am Brigadier General Dr. Emmanuel Chirinji, the Defense Advisor, Uganda High Commission. First of all, I really take this opportunity to thank the panelists for the rich insight about this topic. I can see it's always revolving on leadership, the leadership question. And it really takes board leadership. That is a leadership that is consistent and resolute to cause desirable change. Now, we've talked, there is an issue that concerns me, and I don't know how, I request the panelists, I don't know whoever, the issue of the fact that we cannot run away that the current global economy is now shifting and based on exploitation of resources, the natural resources, which are a base for most of the African countries, African economies. So I really, I need your thought. How can we really get out of this to ensure that, yeah, we control our destiny? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We will come back for another round of questions between Minister Diop and Minister Viruta. Who wants to respond to the question on the ICC? It didn't strike me as if it was thrown at any particular person.
I'm not sure if I understood what was said about the ICC. Yes, we followed that interview with Christian Amanpour. For us, there is nothing new. There is no revelation there. The only part is that at least the prosecutor has the honesty to come forward to admit what we have been saying consistently over the years, that this court is based on double standard. It did not prosecute the main leader responsible for war in Iraq and elsewhere. Only African leaders have been targeted. African have been the first one to also ratify this instrument. Today it's a reality that this court is working mainly to address, to try at least to create problem in Africa. This is also our responsibility. I think we need also to anticipate. We should have anticipated not even to be part of this type of instrument, because today is even very late, but Africa is getting organized. Once again, international relations are based on force, rapport de force, use of violence, double standards. We need to admit it. It's not based on international law. International law is a pretext when it is in the favor of the most powerful, unfortunately. So we need to have also our own instrument also to make sure that our leaders are accountable before our own institutions. So, yeah.
Minister Viruta, the question about if there is any concerted effort to address this issue of young people fleeing Africa, dying in the Mediterranean, getting encamped in Western countries, are we ignoring it? Are you, the leaders, addressing this issue?
We are not ignoring that problem, and even though there is no African Union strategy to address that particular problem of illegal migration, again, we need to look at the causes of that issue. Illegal migration, why these young people are trying to go through very dangerous journey to reach Europe? Why are they trying to leave their own countries? There are many causes. One of them is the lack of opportunities. So it is about addressing these socio-economic problems to create, to give them the skills they need for them to be able to create jobs and be able to contribute to the economies of their families and their countries. Sometimes it is related to climate change issues that we need to address. It could be related to conflicts in some parts of our continent that need to be addressed. So it is the same. If we need to address that particular issue, we need to address the root causes behind the problem. And we need also to work on the other aspect, the legal path for migration. Because migration has been there since very many centuries. Migration will be there in the future. But how could we organize legal pathways for migration to happen? And for this particular aspect of illegal migration of those young people who are leaving our countries to try to go to Europe, we need really to look at the reasons behind the problem. And the biggest reasons are probably the lack of economic opportunities in those countries and the lack of the skills that those young people need for them to be able to be useful to their families and to their countries.
Thank you. Dr. Haji, somebody asked about the fourth industrial revolution and the importance of Africa not being left behind. You told us about the part of the world from which you come, which, as you said, seems to face the same challenges as we do around here. Are you, from your part of the world, being left behind as we are? If you are, what kind of thinking have you put into not continuing to be left behind? If you haven't been left behind, what kind of approaches have you used to ensure that you're not left behind, which you can pass on to those of us in this room as some kind of lessons for Africa?
Well, my response to that would be that unfortunately we have to admit that we live in a selfish world. States are driven by interest. I understand that to a certain level there is a humanity, but I think that those are waves and circles where we go, and sometimes those that show themselves as being human, the other times show them that they focus their interest. Why I started with this is that if we not, first of all, if you not accept, I have a theory about this. If the patient doesn't accept that he or she needs help, you can't help him. So that means that we need to accept the world as it is. Stop crying, okay, that everyone have to come and solve our solutions. And third, if we understand this, that various actors will have various interests, and if we are able to develop proper policies that can filter negative and import what is good, then I think that's the way to go. We, in the Industrial Revolution has a lot of benefits, but it also has a lot of challenges. Digitalization as well. You may disregard it, but in no time it will be here. And it may create a lot of jobs opportunities, but it also can create a lot of jobless people. Because as things are developing, many people will be replaced by the machines or by the applications that can do better for this. So again, it's out to good governance, good leadership that basically will focus and understands the reality, admits the problem, and as I recall again, how do we find the right person that basically will be honest enough, capable enough, and vigilant enough to lead the nation without being corrupt by the power of, let's say, being in power. And with that being said, I would say that no one, even if, let's say, in our families, no one can come from outside and solve the problem inside if we are not start solving the problems inside our families. And that is to our countries. And yes, again, and then the fair question would be to start, are we going to be any better if we are in that position? Let's say in the Russian position, in the German position, in China's position, in the United States position, in France's position, are we going to be any better? Right? I understand that there are double standards, and there are, and I outcry, yes. I understand that there are interests that drive nations, which is fine, but that's the reality. If we continue to, just to cry about this reality and not solving the problems, you're not going to make any move forward. This is why I, again, insist on focusing on developing good leaders, focusing in proper education for our youth, because that's our future. We can just be the one that basically will provide and protect them while they are developed. And then in no time, if you become relevant, and I can give you great examples that the size cannot matter all the time, the place cannot matter all the time, and the position. Let's say, take Northern European countries. They, in terms of resources, maybe to a certain degree, some countries, they are, in terms of weather, in terms of living conditions, they're they're disadvantaged to most of the people that, let's say, have a lot of resources here and live in a, let's say, abundance of resources. But they are hard workers. They basically transform their societies, adapt their societies, and are taking steps forward. So I think maybe good practices to be implemented, but bear in mind, owning your own, leading by your own is very important. Why? Because even the best strategy could be eaten for breakfast by the culture if it's not utilized and adapted to the local needs and local dynamics.
Thank you. Brian, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. The question that General Ngenda Himana raised about solidarity, the answers we received from the foreign ministers clearly show that there are deficits in solidarity within Africa. Now, you as a senior member of the Pan-African movement, how do you explain this lack, this continued or continuing lack of solidarity? And how do we plug this gap?
I think who we relate to is still determined externally, and also determined on very individualistic and sometimes hyper-personalized sense. We wait for the body language of the empire before we move. So something happens in Rwanda, we first Pan-Africanism here, but we look first what is France doing, what is the US doing. When we see there's neutrality, then we come to embrace. So body language of the empire. I think our leadership, I am sorry to have to say this, has had this duplicitous approach to solidarity, where if you listen to speeches, you'll think tomorrow will be liberation. When you look at action, there's such a paucity of action, you realize they are waiting for permission from France or from Britain or from the EU to act. Why? We've been constructed with this persistent and constant fear of loss, that none of our leaders wish to anger the empire. So we wait to make sure that actions we believe are necessary are only taken when we are absolutely convinced the empire will not frown on it. So first thing first, we need a genuineness in leadership that says, if we have shared values at the African Union, and that's the same on the questions of mineral extraction and other questions that we asked. The African Union started coming up together with assistant when my brother Kaberuka was still at ADB, what we call local content laws, local economic development laws. There was an Africa mining vision at the African Union. As early as 2008, with the Africa Mining Vision, we started working on AMDC, that was this Africa Mining Development Center, and etc. So at a rhetorical level, the understanding of the need to build regional value chains, the understanding of the need for local economic development, to build centers of excellence, and to avoid a race to the bottom where each one of us is trying to race to trade on critical minerals, the understanding of the need for harmonizing our policies so that we're ready for AFCFTA, that has been there, except we have an instinct of colonized people. The instinct of colonized people is this. First, make sure the master is not angry. Number two, you act to discipline the rest of the other natives. Number three, try and get the stars as the good boy or the good girl from the empire. Once they say this is a sign of a good leader or a good country. This idea of looking for a stamp of approval essentially means African solidarity will forever only be transacted via the prism of European and American, European and American certification. Certified from Europe or from Washington. Now you can be in solidarity with each other, right? That's why we couldn't be in solidarity over COVID. We were waiting. I mean, I know my brother, Donald and Co, you were running around trying to say, oh, let's get African leaders. They were waiting for permission. until they realize, oh, our people are dying, and suddenly we're coming to meetings now, we want to give. Then the last thing, sir, we talk a lot. We talk a lot. There is a proverb in Uganda that says, if you make an agreement with a lion to become vegetarian, be rest assured you are the first vegetable the lion will eat.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Very quickly, Minister Diop, if you could make your point before we go for a second round of questions.
Yes, because I raised this issue, I think, normally I don't disagree with my brother, but this one I think African issue about the lack of solidarity is much deeper than what you are saying. It's part of it, but I think the first point is, for me, is the indifference. When you have genocide in Rwanda, people think that's far away. It's not our problem. It's US problem, it's France problem, it's other people's problem. They will find the solution. The second is the lack of confidence and the fact that we never value ourselves. Because when issues are occurring in Rwanda, in Mali, in Burkina Faso, we never think that we could be part of that. They think this is too big. While we don't realize more than 50 countries, if everybody decide that, okay, Rwanda has a problem, Mali has 2-3 aircrafts, maybe I can give 100 hours to Rwanda. Because sometimes we think that the problem is so big that I cannot do anything. So for me, it's the lack of confidence and the fact that we never we don't give value to ourselves to say, Africa have the capacity to resolve. So for me, it's a matter of the mindset. Not only from the leader, even from the ordinary citizen, we think we are helpless when situations are occurring. Well, if you turn the problem around and to say, okay, if there is a problem, maybe if we pull some resources together, if I can do, even if I send 10 soldiers to a country, maybe they can do something. For me, it's really a mindset problem. We never see ourselves as part of the solution because we never value ourselves. We don't see the resources which are under our footsteps. We oversee it elsewhere. So we have to value the few resources that we have.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. There was a question from a lady officer over there. No, just where you were there. I think I saw her raising her hand, unless you don't want to ask.
Thank you, sir. Kanoridi Awagwaneza from Rwanda Defense Force, currently at the RDF College, Nyachinama. My question is, how can technology such as biometrics, surveillance, and data analysis enhance human security, while also addressing the concerns about privacy data analysis and protection to potential bias in those systems? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. The gentleman up there.
Thank you. Excellent question.
You will have to... okay. And then after that, there's an officer in front here. Okay. Okay, yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm Senior Superintendent of Prison, Alex Mrenzi from Rwanda Correctional Service. My question is about the cultural security. As we are talking national security, I'm asking myself, can cultural security be considered as a component of national security? If yes, what are the measures or strategies at continental level toward this protection of the traditions of the continent? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Please, over here.
Thank you. I am Air Vice Marshal Hassan Alhaji, the Commandant of the Armed Forces Command and Staff College, Nigeria. I will please ask you to indulge me about 3 minutes. It's not a question. I want to speak on some issues that have been raised by your esteemed panel. First, I want to talk about the issue of solidarity in Africa. The biggest beneficiaries of the change that's happened in West Africa is probably Nigeria and Ghana. The reason is that for a very long time, all our efforts to integrate in West Africa were thwarted by French influence on Francophone African countries. So it's not the other way around. I'll also let you know that despite the problems in the sub-region, our militaries have worked assiduously behind the scenes to make sure that those problems do not go to the wire. For example, despite the sanctions on Mali and Burkina Faso, my college has Malian and Burkinabe officers training with us. And I'll also let you know that just 2 days before I arrived in Rwanda, the Nigerian government has approved a multi-million-dollar budget to train officers and soldiers from some of your countries. So I think the problem of solidarity sometimes is not about those who want to give, it's about those who should receive. And like I said, we're very happy with the current situation, and we hope we'll find a political solution to move for progress, integration, and more solidarity in West Africa. Now, the other issue is that nobody has talked about, particularly when it comes to West Africa, is the issue of culture. If you look at the problems in West Africa around the Sahelian belt, all the way to Nigeria, almost everybody that lives there is Muslim. Now, I come from that part of the country also. And the problem is a lot of us are still living in the past. We have failed to accept that the world has changed. We are still listening to people we should not be listening to. And we are not making any effort to embrace education and progress. That should be considered as one of the causes, root causes of insecurity in Africa, at least on the western part of Africa. Lastly, I want to talk about the urgency of time. My country has been at war for 15 years. One of the questions I've asked my subordinates and superiors alike is, when will this end? This conference or this symposium has been going on for 11 years, and I'm worried about some of the things we are sitting around here discussing. I should think that this year's conference should be addressing issues of artificial intelligence and robotics and how that will push us into the next wave of development trajectory, not talking about some of the issues we are discussing today. So this is a clarion call for Africans and African leaders. There is a need for us to solve some of these problems that have been going on for long so that we can move ahead with the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we have run out of time, but I'm going to ask the panelists. There are two questions. There is a question on cultural security as a component of national security. I don't know if anyone wants to answer that one. But the question on technology, the balance between enhancing human security while also addressing issues of privacy. Dr. Haji, I think you're best placed to answer this.
When it comes to culture and national security, I completely agree that culture should be nested under national security, because most of the culture will reflect to national security, and we reflect how do we interpret concepts of national security and other concepts even in the international relations, etc. And I said, you can have the best strategy ever, but it can be eaten from culture for a breakfast if it's not adopted. When it comes to technology, just because of the time, I think that's a wonderful question, great question. Why? Because it already enters everywhere. And if there are no policy in place to know how you basically secure supply chain, how do you make controls in what do you buy and what do you invest and what do you actually implement, then you might end up that this, on one hand, it could be a good, but it could be also a threat vector. On terms of, let's say, prejudice, I can tell you that even most advanced nations have found themselves in a problem with this. Germany and Netherlands were found by the European Court of Justice as implementing artificial intelligence that being prejudiced, that basically was selecting people from the Muslim community as more problematic in the society. So they have been asked to revision the artificial intelligence tools that they've been using because they failed, as distinguished general mentioned over there from Nigeria, they failed to maintain man in the loop in the process. So the answer is all of these technologies will definitely affect human security, but if we fail to put men out of the loop, then we are in a grave danger.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Biruta, you had a point to raise?
I just wanted to make a short comment on the solidarity issue. It is very important. It is very important, and I don't think solidarity means that it is not necessarily linked to resources. And it is more linked to leadership and ownership than to resources. Because a country like Rwanda, when we decided to deploy troops to support Mozambique, to fight terrorism, or even to support Central African Republic to fight armed groups, it is not because we had more resources than anybody else, than any other country on the continent. It is because we understood that we needed to do something to stabilize, to help those countries to stabilize, because insecurity or terrorism-related insecurity in Mozambique is also a problem to Rwanda and the whole continent. The same with Central African Republic. So I want to say that solidarity is very important, and it is part of the ownership I talked about at the beginning of this panel.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe a word on the cultural security.
Yeah.
I was going to say that I'm not sure the African Union has a strategy in relation to cultural security, but the protection of the tradition on our continent, I think it belongs to, it is the responsibility of every individual government and actually every individual community. So it is important, but the role of governments and individual communities is at the center of any strategy for the continent.
Thank you very much, Dr. Biruta. Could I ask you also to say your last word, because we are now wrapping up?
So let me just say once again that the security challenges on our continent are multifaceted, and that ownership of the problems and the solutions is very important. We cannot keep complaining about the problems inherited from the colonization, because we need to address them. But in any case, we should not expect or wait for the former colonial powers to come and address those problems for us. We need to address them ourselves. We don't need to outsource the solutions for our problem. And most important, we need to put the citizen at the center of whatever our governments are doing. Citizen-centered leadership, governance, and accountability are key if we want to address the security challenges of our continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Diop. Your last reflections, 1 minute.
1 minute. I think let us see ourselves always as part of the solution. Let us also have a change even in the narrative. Let us depict stop seeing ourselves as a poor country or as a poor citizen. I think because this is even, as they said, the cultural poverty, because sometimes really we need to overcome the cultural poverty. I think that's very important. We need also to really maintain hope, because that's a security issue, in my view, is foremost economic issue, because the economic and inequalities that lead to all the security issues we are facing. So let us not focus only on the military and the equipment, the capacity, but let us look at also the economic. If we invest in our youth, it's the best way to prevent conflict, not to organize workshops, but investment in the economic development and empowerment of our young people, for instance, can be a best way, in my view, to project hope and positivity in our continent and to better tackle the security issues we are facing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Haji. Your final reflections?
Okay, it would be okay if I just say I agree with the previous speakers. I'll just say, yes, I think that I'll thank once again for the organizers that invited me in such a distinguished event. And I would like to say that there are many challenges. There are no silver bullet solutions, but I think that investment in the future and sustainable projects is something that basically Africa needs. And as they say, try to stay on the table, not to be on the menu, because no one can solve the problems better than you. And there is a saying, I think it's an Arab proverb that says, better let the Arabs do that tolerably than you do that for them perfectly. And I think it's better for Africa to do the problems by itself, of course, to filter out all the good things and to prevent all the greedy things and bad things that basically try to harm her or to go out of the interests of African people.
And finally, Brian, your final reflections.
There is a Moroccan proverb that says, let's be like a tree that never changes its roots, but may change its leaves in different seasons. It's important to understand that we have repeated lies about ourselves and lies about development. One of the lies we repeat, by 2050, 75% of Africans are going to be living in urban areas. I want to challenge those of you who claim to be intellectuals. The only reasons why Africans are coming to urban areas is because we have not developed the rural areas. But all foreign capital that's coming to your countries is not investing in your urban areas. It's going to the same rural areas that you have socialized your people to believe. They have to leave their land where there are critical minerals. They have to leave that land where there's underground water and come and be what? Homeless in the urban areas, or to be vendors, or to be unemployed. What are they leaving their land to for those who wish to invest in the critical minerals? I would like us to change, first things first. By 2050, 75% of Africa's rural areas, which are also the repositories of critical minerals, of underground water, and of other very valuable assets, will be developed for our people to feel no need to move to overcrowded urban areas where there's a stress. Number one. Number two, women in this country have had phenomenal progress as a result of the leadership, the laws, and the policies. Political advancement. But women in this country and elsewhere need, with the partnership of men, to become economically empowered for three reasons. Over 60% of households in Africa now are led by females because men, my brother, many men who are responsible for the children have either died, have either gone overseas, have denied paternity. So we are raising a whole generation of the future leaders of this continent who are accustomed to rejection, to denial, and to no provisioning, right? And the people who are raising them are culturally subjected to violence. They are also politically subjected to violence, and they are socially subjected to violence. We are not doing women's economic empowerment and political empowerment as a favor. We cannot end conflict because anyone who rapes your mother, your sister, your daughter declares war of a cultural, political, spiritual, and social nature. The cyclical nature of grievance transacted in our community must accept. It's because we have transacted war on the bodies of women. Lastly, young people, I do not think that we have the luxury to talk only about youth employment and entrepreneurship. I think we now need to go beyond making agriculture sexy and some of the continent's food security, climate security, the continent's security depends on young people realizing that as this generation on this stage and other older than us die out, they will remain with the land whether agriculture is sexy or not. They will remain with the rivers whether they think it's a place to go or not. You young people, this is not about anyone making this sexy for you. For goodness sake, if you don't take the responsibility now, you will wake up very soon, you will no longer be youth, you will be adults and you won't know what to do. So stop sleepwalking, wake up, this is your continent. No one is going to give it to you, especially not the elderly leadership. You have to grab the future by the scruff of its neck, not through only protest and demonstrations, but through applying yourself with the skills that you have, using new technologies to produce value that makes sure you are not as poor as your grandfathers or as poor as we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Distinguished participants, we have come to the end of this panel. And Brian couldn't have made a more strong closing statement. But Brian, you talk of making agriculture sexy. Yesterday we had the former Vice Chancellor of the Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture. Now, I have followed this institute since it was established. If you want to see where a government is making agriculture sexy for young people, go and visit Rika. I'm not only encouraging Brian, but other Africans who have come to Rwanda. Please visit Rika and see how agriculture can be made sexy for young people. Thank you very much. Now I'm handing over to the Master of Ceremonies.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause for the excellent panel. Please take your seats. You can take your seats. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to begin by first of all thanking all the panels and moderators for making this event quite interactive and successful. A round of applause to our panelists and moderators. And I wish to personally thank the moderators who have made my job very easy. They have done, the lion's share in interacting with both the panelists and the audience. So thank you very much. So this symposium reminds me of a quote by a famous author who was born before all of us, Thucydides, who said, and I quote, and that was during the Peloponnesian Wars way back. He said, and I quote, "A society that separates its scholars from its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting done by fools." End of quote. So the interaction and intersection of our military leaders and security practitioners, scholars, policymakers in government is quite important for all of us. We get different perspectives and we find practical, plausible, and possible solutions to contemporary security challenges. So I thank you very much for being part of this very important event. The last and final item on the program before we break off for lunch and we probably say our goodbyes is the closing remarks by the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Vincent Biruta. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Vincent Biruta to the podium.
Honorable Ministers, the Chief of Defense Staff, Service Chiefs, Excellencies, Ambassadors, and High Commissioners, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Rwanda, Commandant of the RDF Command and Staff College, General Officers and Senior Officers, distinguished guests, it is my honor to preside over the closing ceremony of yet another successful National Security Symposium under the theme, Contemporary Security Challenges, the African Perspective. Let me start by thanking all the speakers and participants for honoring this event with their presence and for actively participating in the different sessions. I would like to also commend the Rwanda Defense Force, the University of Rwanda, and Rwanda Convention Bureau for the planning and execution of this symposium. We are appreciative of your efforts to organize this enriching conference. Distinguished participants, engaging in an exercise of this nature is vital to contributing to solutions to our common threats. These discussions allow us to harness our strengths and pull together our efforts in addressing these challenges. In addition, the different backgrounds of panelists and participants in this symposium reflect our strong engagement to tackle security challenges and ensuring the safety for our populations. It is my hope that our diverse perspectives will inform our course of action to find practical and sustainable solutions to the issues at hand. Transforming ideas into actions is always the biggest challenge we face. There are no miracle drugs to a given crisis or problem. Rather, we must adopt a multidimensional and holistic approach at solving them, focusing on addressing the root causes before the consequences. It is my conviction that this symposium has addressed a good portion of the security challenges affecting our times and our continent in particular. There is also no doubt that we have extracted valuable lessons that will guide our various actions in our various responsibilities. Allow me to highlight a few key takeaways of this symposium. We have noted that the world is becoming increasingly divided, yet security challenges we face know no boundaries. We have also noted that there is a need to collectively redefine our aspirations and approaches. Otherwise, we are likely to create a future that supports our assumptions and biases. Last but not least, as a people, we need to identify and focus on the essentials: security, dignity, and opportunity for all. I thank you for the wake-up call, and as I close, allow me also to thank once again the leadership of the RDF and the University of Rwanda for organizing this important event. You have truly opened up a debate that I hope will feed into our individual and collective reflection. I thank you for your kind attention, and I wish you all a safe journey to your respective destinations, and hereby declare this symposium closed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs, for those remarks. The next item on the program is lunch. So we will have the first 4 rows exit first before the rest. So please, protocol, guide us to meeting hall 1, where we will all...
Ibibazo bya Afrika ibisubizo nanone kubiturutse ku banyafrika. Ubu ni bumwe mu butumwa burimo gutangwa mu gusoza iyi nama ayijyanye n'umutekano w'igihugu. Ni inama mu by'ukuri yitariwe n'abantu batandukanye baturutse hirya no hino muri Afrika, ariko by'umwihariko inzego z'umutekano z'u Rwanda. Turi kumwe n'umuyobozi mukuru wungirije w'ishuri rya gisirikare rya Nyakinama. Turagushimiye cyane kwitabira ubutumire bwa RBA.
Murakoze.
Twagira ngo mutubwire iby'ingenzi muri iyi minsi 3 iyi nama yagarutseho mubona bifite akamaro by'umwihariko ku mugabane wa Afrika cyane cyane mu gushaka ibisubizo bijyanye n'umutekano. Afande.
Murakoze kumpa ijambo. Nk'uko inama yagomba kwiga ku bibazo by'umutekano byo muri Afrika, ni inama iba buri mwaka, ariko tuba twashyize ku murongo w'ibyigwa iby'ingenzi tubona abanyeshuri bacu bakeneye muri uwo mwaka kugira ngo twungurane ibitekerezo. Nk'uko mwayibonye muri uyu mwaka twagomba kungurana ibitekerezo ku bijyanye n'urubyiruko rwishora mu buhezanguni bikavamo impamvu z'umutekano muke muri Afrika. Twaganiriye ku bibazo by'ihinduka ry'ikirere biteza amapfa n'imyuzure, tuganira ku bibazo by'ibiribwa bikeya n'ibyo bishobora guteza umutekano mukeya, tuganira ku bibazo byatewe n'ibiza n'intambara bigatuma ubuhahirane no gucuruza ku isi cyangwa se cyane cyane muri Afrika bitagenda neza. Uyu munsi mwabonye ko twarangirije ku bintu bijyanye n'ibiteza umutekano muke muri Afrika. Icyo navuga rero muri iyi nama nuko icyambere icyo twashaka kugeraho nk'ishuri twebwe, kuko turi ishuri, twakigezeho ko abanyeshuri bacu babonye umwanya wo kuganira n'abayobozi bakuru bashinzwe iby'umutekano, abahanga mu by'umutekano, abafata ibyemezo mu nzego nkuru z'ibihugu byabo. Ubwo rero twavuga ko icyaranze iyi nama ari uko yitabiriwe n'abo bose. Twari twasabye ko twatumiye ko baza kugira ngo bafashe abanyeshuri bacu gutera imbere mu bumenyi, ariko cyane cyane babone umwanya wo kuganira nabo, bitume barushaho kuzakora neza mu gihe bazaba barangije ishuri mu kazi bazashima.
Afande, hari ikintu mwagarutseho cyangwa byagiye bigarukaho ndetse no muri gahunda cyangwa se ibiganiro byahoze bivugwa uyu mwanya, harimo ikintu kijyanye n'ubuyobozi cyangwa leadership. Leadership ni iki mu by'ukuri, cyangwa ifite uruhare mu kuba umutekano mu bihugu bya Afrika washoboka, ariko nanone munagaruka ku kintu kijyanye n'ubufatanye ku banyafrika ku kwishakamo ibibazo, kuko byagaragaye yuko bidashoboka yuko indi migabane cyangwa se ibindi bihugu byakemura ibibazo byo ku mugabane wa Afrika.
Amateka agaragaza ko iyo tugiye mu mateka ya Afrika, ibibazo byinshi by'umutekano muke, amateka agaragaza ko byagiye biterwa n'ubuyobozi bubi. Ubuyobozi bugira uruhare rukomeye cyane mu gutuma ibintu bigenda neza cyangwa se bipfa, ariyo wavuze yitwa leadership. Duhereye ku ngero za hano hafi no mu Rwanda, muzi ko ibibazo byabaye muri kino gihugu, ibibazo bikomeye, crisis zikomeye cyane zabaye muri kino gihugu zatewe n'ubuyobozi bubi. Iyo rero ubuyobozi ari bwiza, ni intango ikomeye cyane ibindi byose byubakiraho kugira ngo ibibazo bibonerwe umuti, ariko n'ibyakagombye ku ibibazo ntibishoboke kuba byaba. Abanyarwanda baca umugani ngo aho uruzi rutemba rugeniye amabuye ajya. Ubwo nuvuga ngo ubuyobozi ni nk'urwo ruzi, amabuye akaba nk'abaturage cyangwa abandi bose bari muri icyo gihugu cyangwa muri ibyo bihugu, noneho bagakurikira umujyo urwo ruzi rugiyemo. Niyo mpamvu rero ubuyobozi ari ngombwa, bufata ibyemezo, bureba neza ikibazo bukabanza bukacyumva, bwamara kubona ikibazo ko giteye bukagishakira umuti bufatanyije n'abaturage, noneho bukagaragaza inzira, bukagaragaza inzira abandi bafatanya bakanyuramo kugira ngo bakemure icyo kibazo. Ubuyobozi bwita ku baturage, bwita ku bibazo by'abaturage. Nk'uko rero twabibonye muri iyi nama, ibibazo byose twize byinshi byagiye biterwa cyangwa se byanakemurwa n'ubuyobozi. Urugero ngiye gutanga mu byo twize wenda nk'uyu munsi, umutekano muke. Umutekano muke akenshi hariwo twitera nk'abaturage bo muri Afurika. Iyo urubyiruko utaruhaye uburyo bwo kubona imibereho, amerekezo, ntibize, ntibahawe ubushobozi bwo kwirwanaho, byakubitiraho rero wenda n'impinduka z'ibihe, bakaba batangiye guhunga igihugu, bagahunga byandi mwumvise ko bya migration, bagenda bakajya korohama mu nyanja, cyangwa se bagafata intwaro bakarwana bavuga bati ubuyobozi ntibwitayeho, reka dushaka uburyo twakemura ibibazo byacu. Ubuyobozi rero ni ikintu gikomeye cyane mu mibereho y'ibihugu. Iyo bugenze neza ibihugu bitera imbere, iyo bugenze nabi ibihugu birapfa.
Turasabwa iki cyangwa se abanyafurika barasabwa iki by'umwihariko abayobozi ku kijyanye n'iki cy'ubufatanye kugira ngo ibisubizo nk'uko byavuzwe bibonwe n'abanyafurika ubwabo, kuko n'ubundi n'ibibazo biri ku mugabane wa Afurika?
Ibibazo bireba Afurika. Iyo ibibazo bikureba rero ni wowe wa mbere ufata icyemezo n'ingamba zo kubikemura, utabanje wanareba n'abandi ngo bagufashe. Ni wowe ubwawe ugomba kwishakamo ibisubizo. Afurika rero tuyifashe nk'abantu dushyize hamwe, dufite African Union, dufite na regional blocks, ngaha dufite East African Community. Ibibazo bitureba twumvise ko bwa mbere na mbere nidushyira hamwe nk'abo bantu bagize iyo entity, ariko tuzabikemura. Ntabwo umuntu uzavikana arangiza kubidukemura, kuko akenshi na kenshi aza afite inyungu ze ashaka kugeraho. Urugero ngiye gutanga, kandi ntabwo bisaba mikoro ahagije ahambaye kugira ngo ufatanye n'abandi gukemura ibibazo. Urugero mwumvise minisita atanze mu kanya, u Rwanda rujya gutabara muri Mozambique cyangwa se muri Central Africa, si ukubera ko u Rwanda rufite amikoro ahagije arenze ibindi bihugu, ariko ni kwa kumva ya mindset yo kumva ngo umuvandimwe, umuturanyi, mwene data, ngoresheje wenda imvugo y'abihaye Imana, afite ikibazo, mufashe kugikemura nanjye cyaba kindebe ejo n'ejo bundi, wagira icyo ukora kandi ikibazo kigakemuka. Urundi rugero ngiye gutanga, nk'ubushize Symposium y'ubushize twize ku kibazo cya migration, ariko twabonye ko solidarite cyangwa se ubufatanye bw'abanyafurika bushobora gukemura ikibazo cya migration. Muri Afurika ntabwo amikoro abuze, ibyo kurya birahari, ibintu byinshi birahari, ko bikabura inzira byanyuramo kugira ngo abaturage bibagire akamaro. U Rwanda ruri mu bihugu byafashe iya mbere kuvuga ngo abaturage bafite ibibazo byo kudashobora kujya aho bashaka kujya nk'i Burayi, bari baragize ikibazo bagahera muri Libya. U Rwanda rwafashe iya mbere mu kumva ko twagira icyo dukora, iyo solidarite africaine, twagira icyo dukora, bakagaruka bakazana mu Rwanda, tukabakira, tukabafasha, noneho nyuma y'undi bakazabona ukuntu babona inzira yo kujya bashaka kujya. Rero ngo umutekano muke muri Afurika, inzara muri Afurika, kudahahirana muri Afurika byakemuka abanyafurika dushyize hamwe, kuko ibintu byose ingredients zo kugira ngo tubone ibisubizo by'ibibazo dufite muri Afurika biri muri Afurika, birahari.
Ubwo nanone hari ikintu mwavuze kijyanye n'urubyiruko rujya cyane cyane by'umwihariko mu mitwe yitwaje intwaro cyangwa se irwanya ibihugu, birahari myinshi mu bihugu bya Afurika. Ariko nanone tunareba ikijyanye n'ibikorwa remezo, aho usanga kenshi baba nta kazi bafite. Iki kintu cyo ntabwo gishobora kuba intandaro yo kuba n'umutekano muke ukomeza kuba uba mwinshi mu bihugu bya Afurika?
Cyane rwose. Ku ishuri mpagarariye ubu ngubu, ishuri kuri rya gisirikare rya Nyakinama, dufite amasomo menshi twigisha abanyeshuri. Tukiga theories, sinzi uko mu Kinyarwanda nabyita, abanyeshuri bakumva theories, bakumva concepts, ariko hari n'ingendo shuri tujya dukora. Iyo tugiye gusura ibindi bihugu, tuba tugiye kureba uburyo nabo bagize ibyo bibazo bikomeye nk'iby'ubu dufite henshi muri Afurika, uburyo babyitwayemo n'uburyo babivuyemo. Inama nk'izi ziza n'ubundi nko kuzuriza ibintu twigiye mu mashuri, ibyo twaboneye mu ngendo shuri, uburyo Afurika ishobora gutangira gukemura ikibazo ikibona ko kizaba, cyangwa se cyaramutse cyabaye igafata ingamba zo gutuma kidakomera kurushaho. Ubwo rero biterwa n'ingamba ibihugu bifata, icyo twita policies cyangwa se strategies and initiatives. zo gukemura ibibazo bishobora gutera umutekano muke. Urubyiruko uvuze rero akenshi na kenshi infrastructure ya mbere buriya guteza imbere urubyiruko ni ukureka bakajya mu ishuri bakiga bakagira ubumenyi buhagije bwatuma nabo bakwihangira imirimo. Icyo ni icya mbere. Cya kabiri ukakemura ibibazo bituma bahunga, wenda nk'umutekano muke, ruswa se, ikimenyane, ikene wabo, ibintu bituma opportunité zitabageraho kubera imiyoborere mibi, governance issues. Ubwo none ukemura ikibazo cya bad governance. Iyo ugize governance nziza abantu bahamaho ukabereka inzira y'uburyo ibibazo byakemuka kandi ukabasaba kubigiramo uruhare kugira ngo babikemure, baragufasha bifasha kuko igihugu ni icyabo, ibihe biri imbere, the future ni yabo. Icyo gihe ntabwo bagutaba mu nama. Ariko iyo nk'ubuyobozi bwirengagije ibyo bintu by'urubyiruko, ibibazo by'urubyiruko, ntirubiteho, ntirubigishe, ntirubahe opportunity, amikoro yaza akiharirwa na bamwe, ubwo rwose icyo gihe ni nko guhara umuhanda rwose wo gutuma icyo gihugu kizagira ibibazo bikomeye cyane. Kandi urubyiruko ni rwo rufite imbaraga zo gukemura ibibazo, rwubaka, ariko rufite n'imbaraga zo gusenya iyo nyine ubuyobozi butarufashije kureba kure no gukunda igihugu.
Ese afandi kiriya kintu mwavuze kijyanye n'ibisigisigi by'ubukoloni bwo ntabwo gifite umuzi no muri ibi bibazo by'umutekano muke mu bihugu bya Afurika?
Ibisigisigi by'ubukoloni nta na rimwe bizabura, kubera ko abadukolonije nyine baracyafite inyungu hano muri Afurika. Afurika ni wo mugabane usigaranye abantu bakiri batoya, ndashaka kuvuga abantu bagifite imbaraga zo gukora. Ahandi iyo migabane abantu barashaje, niyo urebye nko myaka iri imbere bazagenda barushaho gusaza kurushaho kuko ntibabyara, iyo urebye ukuntu babyara. Icyo ni icya mbere. Icya kabiri, Afurika ifite ibikoresho by'ibanze, resources bakeneye kugira ngo bashyire mu nganda zabo. Ibisigisiro by'ubukoloni ntabwo wabica burundu, ahubwo wowe nk'umunyafurika uzi ko biriho ubyima amatwi, ureba inyungu zawe, ukareba imbaraga ufite, ukareba igihugu cyawe, akaba ari byo uha agaciro kurusha ikiganza kiri inyuma gihora kidusunikira kwitabira ibibaha inyungu zabo kurusha inyungu zacu. Ibyo ntabwo bizabura. Ibisigisiro birahari, ariko ntabwo biri mu nyungu za Afurika, biri mu nyungu nyine zaba badukoronje abanyaburayi cyane cyane, baba badashaka ko twiyunga, dushyira hamwe, tureba kure, dutekereza neza kugira ngo duteze imbere ibihugu byacu. Barashaka ko duhora mu mwiryane, bakabona umwanya wo kuza kugira nyine ngo basahure. Ibyo ntabwo wabibuza, ahubwo ubyima amatwi.
Turagushimiye cyane afande, umuyobozi mukuru wungirije w'ishuri kuri rya Nyakinama. Ubwo twizeye ko n'inama y'ubutaha nabwo izagenda neza nk'iyi ngiyi.
Izagenda neza kuko iyi ni inama ngarukamwaka kuri porogaramu z'ishuri. Muzi ko abanyeshuri bacu barangiza bafite masters muri security studies. Ibibazo nk'ibi ngibi rero bijyanye n'iyo masters program, aho abantu baza bakungurana ibitekerezo ku ngamba ziriho zo gukemura ibibazo by'umutekano muri Afurika, n'uruhare abantu bose twabigiramo kugira ngo Afurika irusheho kuba nziza, ibe umugabane rwose natwe twishimiye guturamo, aho kuba umugabane abantu bose baba bashaka guhunga ngo bajye hanze gushaka amarongo. Murakoze cyane, nanjye ndabashimiye.
Turabashimiye cyane. Nguko rero uko iyi nama irangiye, ni National Security Symposium, inama mu by'ukuri yarebaga ibijyanye n'umutekano mu Rwanda ariko nanone no ku rwego rwa Afurika, aho inzobere cyangwa se abafite aho bahuriye n'umutekano bakomeje kungurana ibitekerezo ku byakorwa kugira ngo umugabane wa Afurika ugire amahoro, ugire umutekano, utere imbere haba mu bukungu ndetse n'abaturage muri rusange. Turakomeza rero kubararikira gahunda za televiziyo y'u Rwanda aho muri hose. Nge nitwa Jean Claude Mutuyeyezu.